Have you thought that maybe pronation support is not a key factor in running shoe selection? Hi and welcome to Ageless Runner. I'm Rob. So both of my road running shoes, my Saucony Freedom and my Ultra Paradigm, are getting kind of worn, and they're going to need to replace in the next month or two. I like them both. I may just get one or the other, just replace one of them. But whenever I'm ready for another running shoe, I often like to look around and see what's out in the market. Is there anything I might like to try? So I'm strolling around the internet. I came across a very interesting study published in 2015 in a British Journal of Sports Medicine. And this study looked at different shoe types as far as their pronation support and how they impact running injuries. Now, pronation, of course, is how our feet and ankles roll when we run or walk. And typically, shoes are divided into three categories as far as how they support your pronation level. If you overpronate, meaning your ankles tend to roll more in, often noticed as wear on the inside of your shoes, often it's recommended to get a motion control shoe, which is a little stiffer, provides a little more support, kind of helps your ankle from rolling as much. And if you're like me, where you kind of roll to the outside or run on the outside of your foot, they often recommend a neutral shoe, which doesn't have a lot of support necessarily, but does have more cushion because people who supinate typically have high arches, like me. And then for the rest of you who have normal pronation levels, it's often recommended to get a stability shoe. So those are three types of pronation shoes that you can find out in the shoe market: motion control, stability, and neutral. And all manufacturers have some of those. They may not classify all those three, they may not have all those three, but you can find those three levels of shoes in different running shoe manufacturers. Now, this 2015 study I was referring to looked at those three levels of pronation support, those three types of shoes, and looked at where are the running rates of injury. How does that impact the way people run? And they learned, surprisingly, even the researchers themselves says, we were surprised by this, but that the pronation support in the shoe did not have a big impact on running injuries. They just didn't see it. And they started talking about a new term I've never heard before, which is preferred movement path. And that's the way our legs and our body wants to run. We all have a preferred motion that we want to go through when we run. It's just our body type, the way our skeleton is, the way our muscles is. It's just the way we want to move our body, our legs, and our feet. And what they found is that the shoe type didn't impact that a whole lot. It wasn't the biggest influence. Our body was, but the shoes weren't. So they said maybe selecting a shoe on pronation type needs to change. Maybe it should not be that way. And they preferred something more they call comfort level that I'll come back to in a little later in this video. Now, some of those same researchers published another study in 2017. They looked at a small group of runners, about 35, and they instrumented to look at the kinematics on the running. So they're looking at how the body's moved in these runners. And again, this study, they looked at three types of shoes. They were from the same manufacturer, but three of their different models. And again, they found that the way the runners ran through their preferred motion path didn't really change a lot depending on the shoes. So again, it kind of comes back that maybe pronation support in the shoe is not that critical. Now, of course, you can go out there and find studies that show that it is. In fact, I found a study from just last year, 2021, where we looked at two shoe types, a neutral shoe and a motion control shoe, and looked again at pronation-related runners. And they had a much larger sample size. I think it was 375 runners with various levels of pronation. Some were severe, some were mild. And they looked at the number of pronation-related injuries in the neutral shoes and the number in the motion-control shoes. And there was a difference. There's no doubt in the data that motion-controlled shoes help reduce the number of pronation-related injuries in the foot and the ankle and the Achilles tendon and those kinds of things. But the difference is only 6%. In other words, 6% fewer people in the motion-controlled shoes had injuries. So said another way, 94% of the runners in this study, the type of shoe they wore did not have an impact. So again, it doesn't necessarily conflict with those other studies, kind of supports it. It just kind of says that maybe not for everyone that pronation support in the shoe is important. Doesn't mean it's not for you. Again, these studies are small and we're millions of runners out there rather than a few hundred that they studied. So if you don't use pronation support to maybe start looking at a pair of shoes, what should you do? Now, I mentioned that first study, that 2015 study, talked about a new paradigm, they call it, of comfort, shoe comfort. They suggested find a shoe that's comfortable comfortable for you. In other words, when you put it on, it feels comfortable. And when you run, it seems natural to you. It doesn't impinge your running, feels effortless for you, feels good. They said that's probably a more important criteria as far as preventing running injury than whether it's got a certain level of pronation support. So that comfort factor they felt was most important. Now, a caveat to all these studies where you talk about a motion control shoe, a neutral shoe, or a stability shoe, is every manufacturer defines that differently. There's no industry standard that says, oh, everybody defines a stability shoe this way. It's just not there that I found. So every manufacturer does it a little differently. So I wouldn't necessarily say that a neutral shoe from Saucony be the same as a neutral shoe from Brooks, for example. They may work a little different, may not feel as good on your foot. Again, it gets back to that 2015 study of comfort level. You want to find a shoe that feels comfortable on your foot and feels comfortable when you run. So my takeaway from this is don't necessarily limit yourself to a pronation type. So I supinate. I tend to run on the outside of my foot. I'm a classic supinator. I got high arches and I wear on the back outside heel of my shoe, and that's classic for somebody who supinates. So I do not necessarily need to always be focused on getting a neutral shoe. Maybe I could try a stability shoe. The important thing is I need to try it on, run around a little bit in it, see how it feels. Does it feel comfortable? Does it work for me? That may work better than saying, oh, I got to have a neutral shoe or I have to have a motion control shoe. And one other thing to keep in mind in all these stuff, as I said earlier, we're all different. We're millions of runners, not a few hundred. If you have a shoe that works for you, by all means, stick with it. If you've got a neutral shoe, even though you tend to pronate a little bit and that works for you, stay with it. Don't change. Keep that shoe. Keep running with that. That works for you. That's great. On the other hand, don't feel afraid to try something different. If you want to try something different, the research might support, it might not change your running injury rate. It may be just fine for you if it feels comfortable. Now, you shouldn't walk away from this also thinking that running shoe doesn't impact injuries. It does. All we're saying is that the pronation support may not be as big of a factor in running injuries as we might think. Certainly other factors can influence running injuries in shoes. Offset, for example, how much offset you have, how it fits, the amount of cushioning, and all those myriad of other factors in a shoe could influence how it impacts you when you're running in an injury-free state. Hey, thanks again for watching. I really appreciate you taking time to watch this today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, scroll down a little bit, hit that like icon, and while you're at it, if you're not a subscriber, boy, I'd love to have you stick around. Please hit that subscribe icon. Thank you for watching and happy running.